Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm just gonna ask, can you hear me okay without the mic? Yeah, okay. So I brought here a few bees. These are all from Greenwood Cemetery. We did some looking at Greenwood to see what species live there. I'm gonna invite you all to come up afterwards and take a closer look if you want to. So I got into bee research because I was interested in kind of like how humans manage land. I came from an ecologist side, and I really wanted to know about how are we managing land, because I know that we're seeing so much species loss in the world, insect loss and decline. Obviously humans are going to manage the land that we need to manage, but are there options? Like, can we do it in different ways? And I went into grad school kind of with that being the impetus for me, and I found that bees are actually a really cool group to study when that's your question, because they're so connected in the food web, right? Not just that bees are themselves food, as all insects are for other creatures, but also that the fruits of pollination aren't just plants being able to reproduce and create the next generation of plants, but also the production of all of the fruits and vegetables that we're eating, all of the seeds we're eating, all of the seeds and berries and fruits and things that everybody else is eating, all the other organisms. So if you look at an area, the management of an area, and you look at the bee community, that's what we call like the diversity, all the different species of wild bees that are there, and all of the different amounts of those species. Sometimes you see a lot of species, but not very many bees. But if you compare those in different ways that you're trying to manage the land, the bees can tell you a lot about what resources are available in the land and how, if you're managing it, if you're providing those resources or not. So that's really what brought me in, and then I started working and I just started learning more and more about wild bees across North America. And I mean, there's so many different kinds. I don't even remember them all. But it really drew me into ecology and was so fascinating for me. So I'm going to share with you some stuff about bees in general. I am certain that you all know more about honeybees than I do, so I won't talk too much about them, and you can feel free to correct me. Bees, that's the one. They have an ancestor which was a wasp, and at some point that ancestral wasp started feeding its babies pollen and nectar instead of other invertebrates like other insects, spiders, different, basically meat. Also, through this, and I don't know which one really happened first, probably at the same time, every time there was a mutation, and you guys know that everything has mutations all the time, right? Every time there was a mutation that made a little extra hair grow, that mutation was beneficial. So we see all of these extra hair grow mutations kept in the bee group, but not in the wasp group, because if you're catching insects to feed your baby, then growing extra hair is just going to cost you all that hair growing energy without giving you any extra reproductive success. So when a wasp has a mutation to grow extra hair, which also happens all the time, it doesn't stick around. It's not beneficial. It's neutral, or maybe even a little detrimental, because, again, they're not useful for providing food for their young if the wasp gets hairier. Now, what about with people? I always say when I go to my son's elementary school, do you know any people who have had a lot of extra hair growing mutations? And everybody always says, Daddy! But yeah, sometimes we grow extra hair. Some of us have lots, some of us have little. growing extra hair is just something that like so many organisms do all the time. Sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't. With bees, it's gonna always stick because any bee that can carry more pollen home is gonna produce more young. And producing more young is how you get those mutations into the population. So we see bees with hairs all over their bodies in different patterns and places because having more hair isn't something that evolved just in the ancestor. It continues to evolve in all the branches of bees all around the world. They're always growing exciting new hair, new patches. Has anybody ever looked at the compound eyes of the honeybee under that cool microscope that Kevin was talking about? Honeybees are very rare in that they have hairs growing within the compound eye. Most bees don't have that, but a few do. So cool. This is what the hairs look like under the scanning electron microscope. So somewhere on the bee's body, they're not all branched, but somewhere on the bee's body you're going to see these little branched hairs. And as they're flying, right, as they're flying through the air, they're not grounded. We talk about being electrically grounded when we're touching the ground, but they actually become electrically charged being up there in the air. And a combination of these wonderful branched hairs and just overall fuzziness plus electrical charge allows them to just, pick up all that sticky pollen through multiple forces. They're super messy, and of course, flowers don't mind that at all. Now, what I'm going to talk about next, is the life cycle of our solitary bees. And most bees are solitary, just like most other insects. Being social is the rare thing and so extremely cool. But the solitary species life cycle is really different from the social species life cycle. So what it looks like is we've got our female. There she is. That's Claytonia, a very lovely little forest floor ephemeral. That means a flower that blooms on the forest floor before the leaves come in on the trees. So it's only in the early spring. So this bee is feeding on the Claytonia. She's going to bring back all the pollen she collects to her nest in the ground. Most solitary species are ground nesters, and in fact, their contribution to the soil is similar to what earthworms do, right? Leaving their waste behind, providing aeration and soil, mixing the soil up, and just really having a connection with all these different soil-dwelling organisms and benefiting them. So she's going to be digging a hole in the soil. Some solitary bees only dig a few inches down. Some dig feet down. It depends on the species. They have different things that they do. She's going to be putting all that pollen into that cell, which is a room on her nest. Once she's done collecting, she's going to form it into a ball. We call it bee bread. Some solitary bees make a pretty solid bee bread with pollen stuck together with just a little water or nectar. Others make kind of a soupy bee bread. Others are someplace in between. And then she's going to lay the egg right on top of the bee bread. The egg looks just like a honeybee egg. So you guys are probably familiar with it. For this bee, which is a little smaller than a honeybee, that bee ball is probably going to be about the size of a green pea for scale. And then the larva will hatch, and it will eat and eat and eat. But of course, it's not big enough to eat that whole thing, so it will molt. And once it sheds that exoskeleton inside, it's a tiny bit bigger. And then it will eat again, and it does about 4 instars before it's finally big enough to finish its pollen ball, its bee bread. After that, it's going to poop. It doesn't poop while it still has food to eat, because that's gross. No. And then it's going to pupate. So I referenced that this bee is feeding on Claytonia, on this flower that only only blooms in the deciduous forest in really early spring before the leaves come out. That means end of March, April. That means she's collecting in April and laying this egg at the end of April maybe, and that this larva is eating for about 2 weeks before it pupates. So this pupa is ready to go. It's ready to metamorphose into an adult, and it's only May. But if it comes out then, there's not going to be any Claytonia, which is the flower that this bee feeds its young. It's a specialist. I'll get a little bit more into that. So this pupa instead starts its hibernation, and it's in the ground from May all the way through to the following end of March. With a life cycle like that, they're hard to keep in hives. I wanted to point out there's about 200 species in New York City and about 400 in New York State, more than 400 really. And just like all pollinators, of course, their economic importance is like really incalculable, right? It's the food that we eat, like all bees, pollination, like flies, like butterflies, everything that they do, and not just for us. Also, it's ecosystem service. So they are really providing all of the products of pollination, reproduction for the plants, and food for everybody else through this pollination. So it's really key. And the job of this female bee, right, is to collect those floral resources. This one happens to be a pollen specialist, only going to collect from Claytonia. Then she's got to figure out a way to keep that baby safe and that pollen ball safe, right? Her baby is delicious and protein rich. Her pollen ball is delicious and protein rich. So many things want to eat these guys. So she's got to keep them safe. I'm going to I keep walking further and further away from the laptop. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about what she needs. So she needs the flowers, those floral resources, the pollen and the nectar, and then she also needs a nesting place. And bees can be very particular about both the nesting places that they'll use. That differs very much by species. Just like I said, the depth of the nest they dig could vary. All sorts of things are going to vary. And for flowers, it's also a lot of variation and a lot to think about, going back to how all these bees globally have been co-evolving with plants in their areas for like millions of years. So as you know, when things co-evolve, it's like a race to eat something and a race to be eaten, often. And then also this race for the bees to gather their food, for the flowers to figure out a way to exploit that, to get the bees to come pollinate for them. This is the particular race that these guys are involved in. So what bees seem to like is they seem to like patches of the same species of flower. When they first start a foraging visit, they're like, okay, this is primo, this is delicious, let me keep looking for it. And they will fly past other species, other kinds of flowers, to get to more of the one that they were just collecting on. So bees love to find patches of stuff. I've literally seen the pollen ball on a bee's leg half pink, half yellow, because mid-foraging, they were like, I can't find any more of the pink stuff, I'm going to switch. But then they switch and they continue to look for the yellow. So I kind of think about those like potato chip ads where it's like, you can't have just one, they get a taste for it. But that's so good for the flowers, right? Because it means they're not just bringing any old pollen from the next flower over to pollinate. They're not covering that flower's stamen with the wrong pollen. So however this evolved, it's working. Oh, and then I also wanted to mention that in this box, and I will show you some more, we've got some bees that are quite large and some which are really tiny, and the tiny ones are adults, right? Because the babies are larva form. So all these teeny tiny bees that you can hardly see in the box are adult bees, and these smallest ones, they don't forage far. And there's so many different species of them. It's kind of like the difference between the elephant and the mouse, right? And the rodents. You have so many species of rodents worldwide because they need less resources. They need less space. So we have so many of these teeny tiny bees that need less space. They could spend their entire life within just 50-meter area. We're talking like one city park, one community garden, a few backyards could be their entire range. I did talk a little bit about specialist bees. Now, some specialist bees are going for pollen only from one species of flower, but many go for a group, like within a genus, or even sometimes within a family, there'll be like a good half a dozen different flowers that they're into. And a lot of the time, the flower doesn't need the bee as much as the bee needs the flower. The flower could use other pollinators as well, perhaps. That kind of uneven thing happens often. It can happen the other way too, like with the fig wasp, right? The fig needs the fig wasp. Anybody know about the fig wasp? All right, well, you guys look it up. It's really cool. Or the yucca moth. There's only one moth that pollinates yucca. So we need to make sure that stays if we want to continue to have that food source. All right, and now the nesting needs. So we've got to find a way to keep our babies safe, right? And we don't want anything coming in that could mess it up, that could eat it, that could eat its food that we've left, right? And the mom in some social or semi-social species is still hanging out around the nest, but in a lot of our solitary bees, she's provisioning and she's done. So we are going to look at bees that are soil nesting. Here's a bumblebee nest in an old mouse burrow. They love a little abandoned rodent burrow in the ground. We're going to look at the way bees nest in wood. Some are cavity nesters. And I'm just going to go see if we got some actual bees to look at here. Ah, yes. So we're going to be looking at bees in the 6 families that live in New York State. Honeybees are in Apidae. We'll check those out first. And we've got 42 genera. I mean, over 400 species. So let's see some of ours. All right, I'm going to start with beautiful. This is our longhorn bee. And this male has antennae that are about as long as its body. So you can see this guy. A lot of the bees in this group are sunflower and Asteraceae specialists. And you can find these guys on sunflowers. Next time you're looking, you'll see those long antennae, and you'll know exactly who that is. You also may see their nests. They like a patch of bare soil. You can see tiny little excavated bits of soil around it, and it's about the size that you could put your pinky right into in the ground. You can spot those guys. We have 12 species of them in New York State. Here's one of the species that's easiest to identify because it's a lot of dark hair on it. And I wanted just also to point out its pollen basket, which is so cool. Do you see how hairy the pollen basket is? Not at all like our honeybee's pollen basket. It's got a huge amount of hair on its lower leg there. And that's where it packs all of the pollen in. Another specialist in the family Apidae, this is our blueberry specialist. It only feeds its babies pollen from vaccinium and a few other plants. So you'll only see it flying when blueberries blooming, also early spring. We definitely have this one in New York City, and it's the only species in its genus. in our area. And by our area, I mean the entire east coast of the US, in this case. Now, you know, has anybody ever tried to plant blueberry? Yeah, blueberry is one finicky plant. It does not want to grow in most places. It wants its soil to be a little acidic. It wants it to be kind of moist, but also well draining. It's picky, picky, picky. And fascinatingly, blueberry bee wants its soil the same way. When I found that out, I was like, why did that not occur to me? Of course, but there we have it. Now, blueberry doesn't need the blueberry bee for pollination. Also, it could use bumblebees and some mining bees, because those three groups do sonication, or buzz pollination. The anthers on those blueberry flowers are not exposed pollen. They have little pores that pollen comes out of when you grab onto them and buzz. Try it. So the bees grab onto them, and they basically use their flight muscles to buzz without moving their wings. So they're like, ee, and the anther just starts throwing off the pollen. That way, that blueberry flower doesn't have to give pollen to the wrong bee. So actually, honeybees also pollinate blueberry, and it is thought that what's happening when they're pollinating blueberry is just pollen that's getting around in the blueberry from buzz pollinators that gets left behind is getting on the honeybee, and then they bring it to the next bee. And having honeybees can actually increase the yield of a blueberry farm by like 20%. But if you have the buzz pollinators, that's going to increase it 60 to 80%. They're really necessary. Also, the big carpenter bee is going to be around. And it's also going to want that delicious nectar from the blueberry flower, but it can't fit its head in there. This is where it bites the petal, sticks its tongue in, and drinks from the nectary without even getting near the pollen. We call it nectar robbing. I would say it's no good, but you know, everything's fine. All right, bumblebee. Now, these are a social bee that evolved in North America. We've got 18 species in New York State alone. They're really widespread, the bumblebee, and I think you said, Amy, that they are the teddy bear of the insect world. Couldn't agree more. So the life cycle for the bumblebee is that they're living in their nest in the old rodent burrow. They're working real hard. They've got their workers. Their workers go out. They do the worker jobs. They collect. They take care of the nest. They take care of the babies. They clean things up. They're secreting wax. They're making these kind of rudimentary looking nests. You can imagine that these wax ovoid shapes that hold the baby and the nectar, which is not honey. It's like really quite liquidy. How that could have evolved into comb eventually. When it comes to be around late summer, they're going to start producing queens and males, and the queens are going to go, and the males are going to go off. Once they emerge, they're going to go do mating flights. The queens are going to come back. Their sisters are going to be feeding them, trying to fatten them up, because they are the ones who are going to hibernate. Everybody else is going to die. After mating, the males are kind of lazy. They don't get let back into the nest. They become bird food, which is important. And the female next year's queens are going to get cared for, eat, and then by around this time, well, I think we'll actually still see bumblebees into November. But by then, all of our workers, this year's workers are going to die. This year's queen is going to die. And next year's queens, which are mated, are going to hibernate. They're going to find something a couple inches into the soil, maybe under a rock or a log, maybe at the base of a plant. One of the reasons when we say leave the leaves, when you're trying to do more ecologically beneficial gardening, is to provide insulation for those queens and for other insects that are living in that crust of our Earth, just very close to the surface, that prevents the temperature changes from being so drastic that could take them out. Now, I didn't want to forget this, I put it right in the middle, but all Hymenoptera, and that is our group, ants, bees, and wasps, are haplodiploid. I know. I'm bringing you back to your high school biology class. Woo! So in every nucleus, in every cell in my body, I have 2 sets of chromosomes. I have 2 sets, and when I produce eggs, I go through meiosis and mitosis, and I create eggs that have 1 set of genes. Then, should my egg meet a sperm, I can create a baby with 2 sets again. That's how we do genetic reproduction, right? So we all have 2 sets. Every nucleus has 2 sets, except for the gametes, and it's different in the Hymenoptera. All of the females have 2 sets, but the males have only 1 set of genes. That means when they make sperm, that's only mitosis, no meiosis. That means every single one of them sperms is identical. So that means when we think about our relationship, right? My mom and I are 50% related. My dad and I are 50% related. I would say I'm 50% related to a sibling, but that's not true. I could be a lot more than 50% related to a sibling if I got very similar DNA from my mom and my dad as they did, or I could be quite unrelated and not look like them at all. But for statistical purposes, we're going to say 50%. Now, these bumblebees, all of these bees and wasps and ants are getting the same packet of sperm. That makes you, does anybody want to guess statistically how closely related you are to your sisters? 75! Yes, thank you. So they're 75% related to their sisters. If they're working for the next generation's reproductive success, they're actually putting more of their genes into the next generation than they would if they were having their own offspring, only 50% related. So we think that's part of the puzzle of why social behavior has evolved so many times in this group. And it has evolved in other groups. You see social behavior in like some beetles, in termites, but in those groups, they evolved social behavior because they have to pass their digestive microbiota, their gut microbiome, to their young because they eat such a specialized diet, often wood. And it is the gut microbiome that's digesting the wood, not their own digestive juices. So they have that symbiosis with their gut microbiome. They have to be social so that they can basically be like just bathing their babies in the spit all the time. All right, need water after that. But in bees, wasps, and ants, we see that sociality evolving. We see so many stages and ways that it can exhibit. We see some species where it seems to become more social and then less social again. So it's just fascinating. And unlike the honeybee, bumblebees are only primitively eusocial. We call the honeybee is like highly eusocial. It can communicate as well. The bumblebee probably does some communication by pheromone, but it does not have that communication that the honeybee does. And its reproductive breakdown of labor is also less forcefully determined. So in the absence of the queen, bumblebees will very easily start laying eggs. Since the workers haven't mated, all their eggs that they lay are going to be males. But they will go for it. Here are some of our local bumblebees. I think bumblebees are so dynamic, and they're one bee that it's really fun to start to learn how to identify. and to plant for, because bumblebees are so dynamic and have been studied a lot. We know that a lot of the species of bumblebee in our country and worldwide are threatened, which is kind of very upsetting. But I think, that's just all the more reason to learn more about them, to help with monitoring, just to get into them. I feel like when I'm starting to do this with my kid, it's almost like better than Pokemon. Similar, but better. I wanted to point out, I said that the bumblebee and the honeybee were closely related. Look at their pollen baskets. We saw some previous Apidae, some of their other close relatives that had like these big bushy baskets, but these guys are so closely related, they both have that corbiculate scopa, that pollen basket that's made of like a long, triangular, slightly concave platter rimmed in hairs that they can fill with so much pollen, they can like up their body weight by something like 40% or something when they're full. I talked a lot about bumblebee life history, and you guys know all about honeybee life history, but I did want to point out that because the bumblebee is reproducing by many queens, right, by making as many as possible, it's really just important part of their natural history that as many queens as possible can survive. So providing all the things that can help them survive the winter, that can help them establish their nests in the spring by themselves. The queen starts out, the bumblebee queen starts out having to do everything. Find the nest site, start building some wax ovoid containers for nectar for babies, collecting all of the pollen. It's not until like a month or so later that she starts having workers finally emerge to help out. So that is a very critical point for the bumblebee in our area. And I also wanted to shout out to honeybees because it is honeybee research that has opened the door to really a lot of ecologists understanding more about what's going on with native pollinator decline. So we were able to figure out that our neonicotinoid pesticide use was actually quite problematic, thanks to honeybees. We learned a lot, and I mean honeybees, I wanted to say, are a focus of research because of their financial importance. But every single bee is going to benefit from what we learn. So one of the things that we've learned above all is how important good nutrition is. Good nutrition can be the difference between a hive overwintering or not. And by good nutrition, I don't just mean like they're not hungry, but we mean a real wide variety of flowers to collect pollen and nectar from. That seems to be what good nutrition is, not just for honeybees, but for other bees as well. So we know that when we're doing like habitat restoration and conservation, it's really critical to put in all those different varieties of plants that are going to work well in your habitat, and just to provide tons of forage. It's important for all the pollinators. We don't want to be in a place where we actually have less pollen or nectar at any time of year than can feed every single pollinator and can allow every pollinator to provision the next generation for their young. And a lot of the time it's really hard to find research that tells you, well, how much forage do I need for a hive, right? Because every flower is different. Every plant produces different amount of pollen, different amount of nectar. How many are in this area? That's just a really hard thing to calculate. But a group of scientists did a study where they took a look at how much pollen a honeybee colony can collect. And then they looked at how much pollen a smaller solitary bee provisions her nest with, and came up with the number that the amount of pollen the honeybees collected in 3 months would have been enough to provide bee bread for over 100,000 solitary bees, like the ones we're looking at. So we really want to make sure we're providing lots and lots of forage, nectar and pollen. Oh, look, and I had a Tom Seeley up there as well, just like Kevin. This guy wrote a book called Darwinian Beekeeping, which talks about just like the evolution of honeybees and other bees and how we can use our understanding and learning about that in our beekeeping. So whether that's about things that are relevant or not fully relevant, it's still super interesting. I recommend that book. And you can just learn about how to, learn more about how honeybees evolved before humans ever started to dabble with them and what wild colonies do. I also had popped up here that we also learned a lot about pollinator problems, diseases, mites, viruses, funguses, all sorts of things from honeybee research. Good nutrition also can make a colony more resilient against mites, against all sorts of pathogens. So it's even more important to make sure that we provide those things. All right, back to Apidae. This is our large carpenter bee, and this is the bee that I probably get the most phone calls about. That's this big one right here, and it's quite aggressive. Anybody familiar with this bee? Oh yeah. I get phone calls from people being like, this bee is attacking my kids. So the large carpenter bee builds its nest in wood that is dead but not yet rotten. Now, that is not easy to find 20,000 years ago and before. It's not easy to find. A branch has to break off a tree and fall on the ground just at the right time in spring, and it has to be like in an opening so the sun can dry it out before it rots. And it has to be like a beautiful branch of just the right size. And then the male carpenter bees will fight for it. It's a territory. And they will fight mid-air brawls. It's like bucks hitting antlers if you watch them right in mid-air. And they tumble out. It's wonderful. You can tell the males because they have this yellow face. The female face is all dark. Now, if a female likes that branch, she comes by and she's like, woo, yeah. Then she will mate with the guy and she will join his harem. And he could have a number of females nesting in his branch. But he has to keep fighting because any other carpenter bee male who sees the branch who doesn't have a nice branch is going to try and fight him for it. So over the million years, he's become extremely aggressive. And then came us, and we built everything out of wood that was dead but not yet rotten. So nesting habitat is no longer a problem for these guys, but would somebody tell them? Because they don't seem to know. These guys are still super aggressive, and they have a short memory. So if you're reading your book on your deck and that's what they're protecting, every time you turn that page, they're checking you out to see if you're a male carpenter bee. That's what's happening. All right. And some of these guys will live more than 1 year. They'll live as adults for part of 1 year, overwinter as adults, and continue to live and reproduce the following year. They're so robust, they can make it through the winter. This is their closest relative in our area in the Northeast. I'm just going to point out the size difference right here. Our large carpenter bee and our small carpenter bee, so closely related, but the small carpenter bee can't excavate into that wood. And now, if you think about it, drilling into wood, could you find a better protected spot for your baby? It is impenetrable and hygienic in there. What the small carpenter bee is going to do is it's going to clear the pith out of standing dead stem. So it uses its mandibles, it either chews in or it finds a stem that's broken. It's going to clear out that pith. And then it's going to have a very similarly safe and clean nest as the large carpenter bee has in the wood. And people, it makes sense how you would make a linear nest in the dead stem, But in the branch, how does that work? The same way. The carpenter bee goes in and turns the corner and makes a linear nest inside the branch. So for the small carpenter bee, one of the things we need to provide is the home that they like. And a lot of the time people ask me, you know, in my community garden, we were talking about how you need to like leave stuff, let nature take its course, but what does that really mean? So I wanted to just tell you guys that in year 1, your plant's gonna grow. In year 1 winter, your plant's gonna die. Maybe it'll get stem broken, maybe you'll trim it, maybe a deer will eat the top. The next summer, it's standing and it's dead. Either it's open and the bee can just access the pith, or the bee can chew through the stem and access the pith in some types of plants. So in year 2, it is an active home. We've got bees going down the stem, making the pollen ball, laying the egg, making another cell, all up and down the stem. When they're done with the stem, they'll start a new stem. And so winter number 2 comes, and those stems are full of hibernating baby bees. Then we're in summer number 3, and they're emerging. But you still can't cut it back, because other bees are going to come and live in the now unoccupied stem in year 4. Well, you could cut it back, but that's what would happen out in nature. Oh, and some people ask me about the bee hotel, which is a very cool thing to set up. I don't like to call it a bee hotel at all. I like to call it an insect hotel. And I call it an insect hotel because it's not really that beneficial to cavity nesting bees, but it's very, very cool. And people have it in schoolyards, other places, community gardens. I think it's a wonderful way to get into native bees, but also all other kinds of insects too that might like it. I say it's not that beneficial for bees just because I have watched predatory insects and birds sit outside and eat the bees that are going in and out. As you can imagine, having all of your entrances very close together, much easier for a predator to find you than if you've just got standing dead vegetation kind of blowing in the landscape. That's much harder for that bird to track. And these are the bees that are coming in year 4. We're moving on to family Coletidae now. These bees do not create their own home, so in order to keep it hygienic and safe, they actually secrete a substance that they paint on the inside of the cell with their tongue that dries, and then it's hard. It's like almost like plastic wrap. They're called a cellophane bee. You could pull it off with a tweezer, and it creates a barrier to try to protect that baby bee and that bee bread, that pollen ball. And we have 14 species in our state. And also, as I noted, these guys aren't hairy. Do you guys know about the honey stomach, the crop? So bees have an early part of their digestive tract without any digestive juices in it. It's called a crop or a honey stomach, and they can drink the nectar, carry it in there. It doesn't get any digestive juice in it, and then they can regurgitate it to make honey or to feed their young without it being like vomity, right? So it's, they can carry both their nectar and their pollen in there. And now here's our mining bees. So these are so many different species and so many floral specialists in this group. We've got 85 species in New York State. They have so many different specialties, and they do so much soil work. These guys are really amazing. Everything from all of the early spring blooming trees like willow and redbud, things like that. And there are species that are throughout the season. They generally have pretty short flight seasons. The one I was talking about that was collecting from Spring Beauty in the beginning was Andrina. Ah, here it is. Back again, our Spring Beauty bee. I feel like I already talked about this, but one thing that we could mention about them is that they have this very short flight season when the flower is in bloom and producing pollen, which means they're actually even more at risk. Because while the bumblebee is, it's very at risk that new queens should survive to make new colonies, every year they do manage to, if they make a colony, increase their numbers and produce a number of queens. But this one has a few weeks to produce as much offspring as it will. So if we're seeing more habitat fragmentation and habitat loss, it can really affect these guys. They have to fly a little further, and every year they're making fewer offspring. The leafcutter. This bee is now family Megachilidae. This bee actually is going to trim sections out of leaves, and there's one that trims sections out of flower petals for the most beautiful nest. And then they're going to line the nest, which they're going to be cavity reusers, some in cavities in soil, previously used insect nests, some cavities in stems, some will even kind of piece together a cavity out of like masonry. I've seen them really nesting in fabulous places. And they're going to be putting those leaves inside, and that's going to help protect their young and the food ball. And these ones are identifiable by their pollen basket, which is under their abdomen. Do you see all that comb of hairs under the abdomen? So this whole group came from an ancestor who had a lot of sprout hair under your abdomen mutations. And we've got 22 species in the state. This is the cuckoo of one of our local leafcutter bees. Do you guys know the cuckoo bird? Is that 5 minutes you're giving me?
We actually need to wrap it up a little bit.
Uh-oh.
10 more minutes left in the hour.
Okay. 2 more minutes of talking, and then I'm stopping. The cuckoo is just like the cuckoo bird. It's going to be outside the nest of the host bee. It's going to dart in there. It's going to lay its egg in the host bee's nest, just like a cuckoo bird lays its egg in another bee's nest. Does anybody know about the cuckoo bird? Okay, cool. If the host bee finds the cuckoo's egg, she will kill it. But if she doesn't, she'll close up her nest with that last piece of leaf. The cuckoo's egg will hatch first, and its larva has sharp mandibles, and it will kill the host's egg and eat the bee bread and come out the next year. This is kind of like a crazy sci-fi thing, but it actually is yet another layer in the food web that lets us know we have a healthy population of the host and is cool to see. A couple other different cuckoo bees, not as hairy, you may notice, because they don't need to collect. Our mason bee also has the scopa on the bottom of the abdomen. Our sweat bees, I could talk about forever because they exhibit sociality in so many different ways, including not at all on a mountaintop where resources are scarce, and in the same species in the valley use social behavior where resources are not scarce and there's enough to feed the workers as well as just provision for your young. Our gorgeous green bees, which are also sweat bees, and conserve it, we already discussed it. Thank you. All right. So I think we still have like 7 minutes for questions and for if people want to take a look at some of these local bees. I'll pass it around.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Does anybody? Oh, yeah.
Sarah, when it comes to pollination, like of foods that humans eat, how do they compare wild bees to like honeybees?
Oh, that's a great question. So obviously, plants that evolved here, wild pollinators were able to provide 100% of the pollination needed. And wild species, in addition to things like buzz pollination, where they're necessary for things like blueberries and their relatives, for eggplant, for tomato, pepper, buzz pollination is necessary. But even in things like stone fruit apples, we find that native species are able to provide the pollination that is needed as long as there's enough nesting and floral habitat to support them through all of their life stages, through their whole flight season. So that's really what's key. We actually really need honeybees in our country because of the way we've set up our agriculture, right, in the big monoculture. The native species can't live there. There's not enough flowers for when the target farmed species isn't in bloom, and there's not enough nesting sites, especially if the soil is constantly turned. But as long, you know, I've seen farms put in like floral paths and corridors throughout their farm that will provide all of the floral and nesting needs for native species to do complete pollination.
Real quick, I apologize.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to make sure we can wrap up a few things, a few loose threads. Hopefully, Sarah, I don't want to put you up to this if you got to rush, but
I don't
you can
have
stick
to
around
rush.
for a few minutes. Maybe Sarah can answer some questions on the side for everybody. But I want to say a big thank you to Sarah for coming out.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me, man.
Yes,
It's
thank you
super
for
fun.
coming out. This is such a great example of the fact that I think when a lot of people get honeybees, they're so focused on the honeybees, you forget the impact that your hive has, not just on the other honeybees around, but also on in the environment in general. And this is really, I learned a lot of great stuff on this, so thank you.
Awesome.